Picture this, a wanted man. Police in 3 states looking for him. And instead of hiding, instead of laying low, he sits down and writes a fan letter. Not to his mother, not to his lawyer, to a car company. That's not a joke. That actually happened. And the car he was writing about is the reason he stayed alive as long as he did. Today, we're looking at the strange, true story of Clyde Barrow, the most wanted man in America in 1934, and his obsession with one machine, the Ford V8. This isn't just a crime story. It's a story about a car that was so far ahead of its time, it accidentally became the getaway vehicle of choice for half the criminals in the country. And if you want me to keep digging up the machines that shaped American history, the ones Detroit built and then almost forgot about, hit subscribe. If you're watching this on your TV right now, grab your remote, go up to the channel page, and hit that subscribe button. It actually helps. It tells the algorithm real people are watching, not bots. That's the only reason this channel keeps running. All right, let's get into it. Who was Clyde Barrow before the legend? Before he was the greatest outlaw in America, Clyde Chestnut Barrow was just a poor kid from Texas, born in 1909. Near Tellico, Texas. His family were cotton farmers who lost everything and moved to Dallas, trying to scrape by in one of the poorest parts of the city. He wasn't some criminal mastermind who dreamed big from day one. He started small, stealing turkeys, stealing chickens, small-time theft, the kind that gets you a slap on the wrist. But by his early 20s, he'd moved up to burglary and car theft. And that's the part that matters for our story, car theft. By 1930, Clyde was in prison, Eastham Prison Farm, Texas, one of the roughest prisons in the country at the time. And prison changed him. He came out a different man, harder, angrier, and according to people who knew him, willing to kill. Around this same time, he met a young woman named Bonnie Parker. She was a waitress, married, unhappily, to a man serving time for murder. She and Clyde fell for each other fast, and from that point on, their names would never be separate again. The crime spree, and why speed, mattered more than guns. Here's the thing. People get wrong about Bonnie and Clyde. They weren't the biggest bank robbers in American history. They weren't even close. Most of their jobs were small. Gas stations, grocery stores, tiny rural banks that barely had enough cash to fill a lunch bag. What made them dangerous wasn't the size of the heists. It was how hard they were to catch. Between 1932 and 1934, the Barrow gang crossed state lines constantly. Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Louisiana, New Mexico. Local police departments back then didn't talk to each other. There was no FBI database, no radio network connecting small-town sheriffs. If you crossed a state line fast enough, you basically vanished. And to cross state lines fast, you needed one thing above everything else: a fast car. This is where the story stops being about crime and starts being about engineering. Enter the Ford V8. In 1932, Ford Motor Company did something nobody else in the industry had done. They put a V8 engine into an affordable car. Before this, V8 engines existed, but they were expensive. They were in luxury cars, Cadillacs, Lincolns, cars regular Americans could never dream of owning. Ford changed that overnight with the Ford Model 18, more commonly just called the Ford V8. The engine was a flathead V8, 221 cubic inches, producing about 65 horsepower at launch, later bumped up to around 85 horsepower within a couple of years. Doesn't sound like much today, but in 1932, that number was a revolution. Most cars on the road were putting out somewhere between 40 and 60 horsepower with 4 or 6 cylinders. The Ford V8 blew past almost everything in its price range. And here's the part that made it perfect for a getaway car. It wasn't just fast in a straight line. It had real low-end torque. It could accelerate hard from a dead stop, which is exactly what you need when you're pulling out of a bank robbery with a car full of lawmen forming up behind you. Ford advertised it as the car for the everyday American family. What Ford didn't advertise, what Ford couldn't have predicted, is that it would also become the favorite car of every outlaw, bootlegger, and bank robber in the country. Clyde Barrow stole dozens of them, not one or two. Historians who've tracked his movements believe he stole and drove somewhere around 24 Ford V8s over his criminal career, sometimes swapping cars every few days to stay ahead of police who were now looking for a specific vehicle. Why Clyde specifically loved the V8. Clyde wasn't just using the Ford V8 because it happened to be around. People who knew him said he was picky. He wanted Ford V8 specifically, and he'd pass over other cars to get one. Part of it was pure performance. The V8 could outrun almost every police vehicle of the era because most police departments in small towns were still using older six-cylinder cars, sometimes cars that were years out of date. A local sheriff in a beat-up Chevrolet had basically no chance of catching a Ford V8 on an open road. Part of it was reliability. Robbing banks and driving all night through 3 states puts a serious strain on a car. Clyde needed something that wouldn't break down halfway through Oklahoma. With police closing in, the Flathead V8 had a reputation for taking abuse and still running. And part of it, honestly, was probably pride. Driving the newest, fastest, most talked about car in America, while being the most wanted man in America. That's the kind of thing that fit Clyde's personality. He wanted attention. He got it. The letter to Henry Ford. Now, here's where the story gets almost impossible to believe, and where we need to slow down and be honest with you about the facts. YMIC. April of 1934, Ford Motor Company received a handwritten letter, postmarked from Tulsa, Oklahoma. The letter praised the Ford V8 in glowing terms, saying the writer had drove Fords exclusively whenever he could get away with one, and that for speed and reliability, the Ford has got every other car skinned. The letter was signed Clyde Champion Barrow. Henry Ford himself received it. His office actually drafted a thank you reply and mailed it back to Tulsa. Clyde never got it. By the time it arrived, the gang had already left town. Here's the part you need to know. Historians are not fully convinced this letter is real. Clyde's own family, including his sister, always insisted he never wrote it, partly because the signature used the middle name Champion, when Clyde's actual middle name was Chestnut. The Henry Ford Museum, which still holds the original letter today, states plainly that handwriting analysts have raised doubts about its authenticity. On top of that, a nearly identical letter, supposedly from fellow outlaw John Dillinger, showed up at Ford a month later, and that one was later proven to be a complete fake, likely part of an early publicity stunt. So is the Clyde Barrow letter real? Nobody knows for certain, even today. But most historians agree on one thing. Whether Clyde physically wrote it himself or not, it captures exactly how he felt about that car. He drove Ford V8s obsessively. He stole them specifically. He was photographed posing proudly. Next to them, guns and all, real letter or not, the sentiment behind it lines up with everything we know about the man. The end of the road. The Ford V8 gave Clyde Barrow speed. It didn't give him forever. By early 1934, law enforcement had finally started coordinating in a way they hadn't before. A former Texas Ranger named Frank Hamer was brought in specifically to track down Bonnie and Clyde, and he studied their patterns for months, the routes they favored, the towns they returned to, the people who might be hiding them. On May 23, 1934, less than 6 weeks after that letter reportedly reached Henry Ford's desk, Bonnie and Clyde were driving a stolen Ford V8 down a rural road near Gibbsland, Louisiana. Hamer and a posse of officers were waiting. They opened fire without warning. Bonnie and Clyde were killed instantly, still inside the car that had kept them alive for 2 years. That same Ford V8, riddled with over 100 bullet holes, became almost as famous as the Outlaws themselves. It was displayed at fairs and carnivals for decades afterward. People paid money just to stand next to it. Why this story still matters. Here's why this isn't just a crime story. It's a story about what happens when engineering outpaces everything built around it. Ford didn't design the V8 for criminals. They designed it to put real performance in the hands of regular working Americans, at a price a farmer or a factory worker could actually afford. But performance doesn't check who's driving. The same horsepower that let a family cross the country on a road trip also let Clyde Barrow outrun a sheriff with a 6-cylinder car and a grudge. For 2 years, a single-engine choice by Ford's engineering team shaped the entire chase between the most famous outlaws in American history and the law trying to catch them. That's not something you see very often. A piece of machinery becoming an actual character in a true crime story. Wrap up. So there it is, the story of Clyde Barrow and the car he trusted with his life, a car that was faster than the law, tougher than the roads he drove it on, and possibly the subject of a fan letter he may or may not have actually written. Did you know about the letter before this video? Do you think it's real, or do you side with Clyde's family on this one? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear it. If you like this one, subscribe for more stories like it and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. See you on the next ride, where we might just find out that Bonnie had a favorite car of her own, and it wasn't the one you'd expect.